The Duke rode down the old London road when his hound stopped by a sign that read, "Help her," then dug a box. She was already cold when I lifted her from the earth. Her fingers, pale as winter moonlight, clutched a letter stained with soil and tears. A confession meant for someone who would never read it. My hound, Thaddeus, whimpered as I cradled the woman's lifeless form, her face so serene it broke something ancient inside my chest. I had not wept since my mother's funeral 20 years prior. I wept then on that God-forsaken roadside, holding a stranger who had been buried alive, with nothing but her shame and a wooden sign that begged the world to save her. I was too late. Or so I believed. Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. The London road stretched before me like a serpent of packed earth and broken promise, winding through the October mist that clung to England's throat. I was Julian Ashworth, 7th Duke of Ravenswood, a title that meant nothing when measured against the weight of grief I carried in my saddlebags. The remnants of my father's estate sold piece by piece to creditors who circled like vultures over our ancestral ruin. Thaddeus had been my sole companion for 3 days of riding, a wolfhound with eyes too intelligent for any ordinary beast. My father had won him in a card game from a Scottish baroness who claimed the dog was cursed to sense death before it arrived. I had laughed at such superstition then. I was not laughing now. The hound had stopped so suddenly I nearly rode past him. His massive head was lowered, his body rigid as carved stone, and from his throat came a sound I had never heard, a keening, mournful wail that raised the hairs along my neck.
"Thaddeus, what devil has possessed you?" But he did not move. His paws began to scrape at the earth beside a weathered signpost, and it was only when I dismounted that I saw the words painted in desperate, uneven letters. "Help her." The sign was fresh. The paint still gleamed wetly in the fading light. "Who?" I called out to the empty road, my voice swallowed by the mist. "Who needs help?" Thaddeus dug with renewed frenzy, his claws tearing through the soft soil near the roadside. And then I saw it. A corner of wood, a box buried barely 2 feet beneath the surface. My heart became a drum of war. I fell to my knees and dug with my bare hands, dirt embedding beneath my fingernails, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The box was pine, hastily constructed, no larger than a traveling trunk. There were air holes drilled into the lid. Air holes. "Christ," I whispered, and tore the lid free. She lay inside like Ophelia in her watery grave, her gown of ivory silk now gray with earth. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, spread like a halo around her face. Her eyes were closed. Her lips, once perhaps rose-hued, were pale as ash. I pressed my fingers to her throat, searching for a pulse I knew I would not find. Her skin was cold, cold as stone, cold as death. "No," I breathed. "No, no." I lifted her from that terrible coffin, cradling her against my chest. She was light, too light, as though death had already begun to claim her substance. In her hand was clutched a letter, sealed with red wax that bore no crest, no mark of ownership. Thaddeus sat back on his haunches and released a howl that echoed across the empty heath, a sound of such profound sorrow that I nearly wept again. "I am sorry," I told her, though she could not hear me. "I am so desperately sorry." And then, impossible, miraculous, damning, her chest rose with the shallowest breath.
I carried her to the nearest inn, a squat building of timber and stone called the Crowned Stag, where the proprietress took one look at the muddy, unconscious woman in my arms and crossed herself. "She's not dead," I said sharply, before the woman could speak, "but she soon will be if we do not act. I need your best room, hot water, blankets, and whatever physician this God-forsaken hamlet can provide." The woman, stout and gray-haired with eyes like flint, studied me with the particular suspicion reserved for dukes who arrive covered in grave dirt, carrying dying women. "And who might you be, sir, to be giving orders in my establishment? The Duke of Ravenswood. And if you value your livelihood, you will move. Now." Perhaps it was the title. Perhaps it was the desperation in my voice. But she moved. Within minutes, I had the woman, still unconscious, still barely breathing, laid upon a bed in the inn's finest room. I sent for the physician, for wine, for whatever aid could be rendered to one who had been entombed alive. The physician arrived within the hour, a wizened man named Dr. Cornelius Black, who smelled of tobacco and carbolic soap. He examined her with the practiced efficiency of one who had seen too much death to be surprised by its proximity. "Her lungs are weakened," he said finally, straightening, "but she breathes. Remarkable, truly remarkable. Most would have suffocated within the hour. She must have been buried recently, very recently. Can you save her?" He met my eyes, and in his gaze I saw something that made my blood run cold. Not pity, but certainty. "The question, Your Grace, is not whether I can save her. The question is whether she wishes to be saved." "What do you mean?" "Look at her hands." I did. Her palms were torn and bloody, her fingernails broken to the quick. "She clawed at that coffin lid," Dr. Black continued quietly, "fought for her life with everything she had. But look closer at her wrists." I took her left hand gently, turning it in the candlelight. There, barely visible beneath the grime, were marks, thin, white scars that circled her wrist like cruel bracelets. "Those are old," the physician said. 6 months, perhaps, a year. Someone tried to bind her before. And given the circumstances of how you found her—" He trailed off, letting the implication hang between us like a noose. "Someone tried to kill her, and this was not the first attempt." "Precisely." I sank into the chair beside the bed, my legs suddenly unable to bear my weight. Outside, I could hear the rain beginning, a soft percussion against the windows that sounded like fingers, tapping, tapping, asking to be let in. "Who is she?" I asked, though I knew the physician could not answer. "I know not, Your Grace, but I would wager my practice that whoever buried her expected her to stay buried. He left instructions: keep her warm, give her broth if she wakes, and under no circumstances should she be moved until her lungs have cleared." Then he departed, leaving me alone with a woman whose name I did not know, whose life I had saved, and whose enemies were still, presumably, at large. I should have left, should have reported the matter to the constabulary and washed my hands of this Gothic nightmare. But when I stood to leave, Thaddeus placed himself before the door and would not be moved. "Traitor," and muttered. The hound's eyes, amber in the firelight, seemed to say, "You know what you must do." So I stayed. I pulled the chair closer to the bed and took the letter from where I had placed it on the bedside table. The seal was broken. I had checked it earlier for any clue to her identity. Inside, the script was elegant, feminine, and written with a hand that had trembled. "To whom it may concern. My name is Seraphina Hartwell. I am the daughter of Baron Hartwell of Somerset, though he has disowned me and would sooner see me dead than acknowledge my existence. I have been accused of a crime I did not commit. I have been judged by those who refused to hear my testimony.
And now I am being silenced forever by the one person I trusted above all others, my own brother, who believes I have brought shame upon our family name. If you are reading this, it means I am likely dead. I ask only that you know this. I am innocent. I loved unwisely, but never dishonorably. And I forgive them all, even as I die at their hands. May God have mercy on their souls. I fear he will find none to spare for mine. Serafina. I read the letter 3 times, each word branding itself upon my memory like a hot iron. Baron Hartwell. I knew of him, a minor noble, with a reputation for gambling and a temper that had landed him in duels on more than one occasion. If this woman spoke true, her own family had condemned her to a grave for the sin of loving badly. England, I thought bitterly, is full of such stories. I looked at Serafina Hartwell, at the gentle rise and fall of her chest, at the vulnerability of her form beneath the quilts, and I made a decision that would alter the course of both our lives. I would protect her. I would discover the truth, and I would see justice done, though it cost me everything I had left. The rain fell harder now, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like the laughter of gods who had long since stopped caring about the fates of mortals. She woke at dawn. I had dozed in the chair, my head tipped back against the wall, when I heard her gasp, a sharp, terrified intake of breath, like one drowning who has finally broken the surface of dark water. I was at her side in an instant. "You are safe," I said quickly, keeping my voice low and steady. "You are alive, and you are safe. No one will hurt you here." Her eyes, wide, gray as storm clouds, fixed upon mine with an intensity that stole my breath. For a long moment, she simply stared, as though trying to determine whether I was real or some phantom conjured by her oxygen-starved mind. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "You saved me." "My hound saved you. I merely did the digging." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, there and gone like candlelight in wind. "Thank you for the digging." "Can you tell me what happened? Who did this to you?" The smile vanished. She turned her face away, toward the window where gray morning light spilled across the floor. "It does not matter. They believe me dead now. Perhaps that is for the best." "Your letter suggested otherwise." Her gaze snapped back to me, sharp with alarm. "You read my letter?" "I did. Forgive me, but I was searching for any information that might help me save you. Your name is Serafina Hartwell. Your father is a baron, and your brother—" "Stop." The word was a command, delivered with such quiet authority that I obeyed. "I do not wish to speak of it. Not now. Perhaps not ever." "Someone tried to murder you," I said gently. "That is not something that can simply be ignored. And yet I must ask you to do precisely that. I am dead to them now, Your Grace. Let me remain so." "How did you know my title?" "The innkeeper was quite vocal about the noble duke who arrived with a corpse in his arms. News travels quickly in small establishments." Despite the gravity of our situation, I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. I shall have to remember that in future. She studied me then, her gaze traveling over my features with an assessment that made me acutely aware of my disheveled state, my shirt still stained with grave dirt, my hair undoubtedly wild from a night spent sleeping upright. "Why did you help me?" she asked, finally. "You owe me nothing. You do not even know me." "Because," I said slowly, choosing my words with care, "I once failed to help someone who needed it. I will not make that mistake again." Something in her expression softened. "Who did you fail?" "My sister. She married a man who seemed kind but was cruel behind closed doors. When she asked me for help, I told her she had made her choice and must live with it. She died 6 months later, thrown from a horse her husband claimed was spooked by lightning. There had been no lightning that day." The words hung between us, a confession I had never spoken aloud. "I am sorry," Serafina whispered. "As am I. But apologies do not resurrect the dead, so I must content myself with saving those I can." I leaned forward, holding her gaze. "Let me help you, Miss Hartwell. Tell me what happened, and I swear to you on my sister's grave that I will see justice done." She closed her eyes, and for a moment I thought she would refuse. But when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears, and a determination that spoke of steel beneath silk. "Very well, Your Grace. I will tell you everything. But I warn you, the truth is neither simple nor kind, and when you hear it, you may come to wish you had left me in that box. Try me." So she began. "My crime," Serafina said, her voice steady despite the tears that tracked silent paths down her cheeks, "was loving a man I could not have. Or rather, loving a man I was told I could not have, because his station was beneath mine and his prospects non-existent." She was sitting up now, propped against pillows, her hands folded in her lap with a composure that belied the horror of her tale. "His name was Thomas Graves. He was a tutor at my father's estate, hired to instruct my younger brother in mathematics and history. Thomas was brilliant, educated at Cambridge, fluent in 4 languages, with a mind that could solve puzzles even my father's steward could not unravel. But he was poor. His father had been a vicar who died leaving nothing but debts, and Thomas worked to support his mother and 3 younger sisters." "An honorable man," I observed. "The most honorable I have ever known," she replied, and the love in her voice was unmistakable. "We did not intend to fall in love. It simply happened, as these things do, through stolen conversations in the library, through shared laughter over my brother's latest mathematical disaster, through long walks in the garden where we spoke of philosophy and poetry and all the things that young people believe matter when they are falling in love." She paused, drawing a shaky breath. "My father discovered us one evening in the conservatory. We were not," she colored slightly, "we were merely talking, standing perhaps closer than propriety dictated, but nothing more. Yet my father saw what he wished to see. He had Thomas beaten and thrown from the estate. He locked me in my rooms and informed me that I was to marry Sir Edmund Blackthorne, a baronet of his acquaintance who was twice my age and known throughout Somerset for his cruelty to servants." "Did you agree?" Her laugh was bitter. "Of course not. I refused. I told my father I would rather die unwed than marry Blackthorne. So my father, in his infinite wisdom, decided that if I would not marry, I was of no use to him. He told the village that I had disgraced myself with the tutor, that I was pregnant with a bastard child." My hands clenched into fists. "Were you?" "No, I was innocent in every sense that matters, but the accusation was enough. Within days, I was a pariah. The servants would not meet my eyes, the vicar refused me communion. Even my own mother," her voice broke. "My mother told me I had brought shame upon the family, and that she could no longer acknowledge me as her daughter." "And your brother?" "Richard. He was the one who locked me in that box." The words fell like stones into a well, echoing in the silence. "Richard believed father's lies," she continued, her voice now devoid of emotion, as though she were recounting something that had happened to someone else. "Or perhaps he merely saw an opportunity to ingratiate himself with our father. I do not know.
But 3 days ago, he came to my rooms and told me he had arranged for me to be sent to a convent in Scotland, far enough away that I would never embarrass the family again. He gave me laudanum in my tea. When I woke, I was in that box, in the earth, and I could hear him above me shoveling dirt onto the lid. I could not speak, could not move. The horror of it was beyond comprehension. I screamed until my voice gave out, Serafina whispered. I clawed at the wood until my fingers bled. And then I prayed. I prayed to God, to anyone who might listen, that someone would find me, that someone would see the sign I had begged Richard to leave, a final mockery he agreed to, thinking no one would ever pass this particular stretch of road. She looked at me, her gray eyes luminous with tears. And then you came. I reached out slowly, carefully, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but they curled around mine with surprising strength. I am sorry, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. I am sorry that your family failed you so completely. But I promise you this, Serafina Hartwell, they will not touch you again, not while I draw breath. Why? She asked again, and this time the question was not one of curiosity, but of desperation. Why would you involve yourself in such a sordid affair? You owe me nothing. Because, I said quietly, I am tired of living in a world where innocence is punished and cruelty rewarded. Because my father lost everything gambling on poor investments while good men like your Thomas struggle to survive. Because my sister died and no one cared enough to ask why. Because I have spent 7 years as a duke doing nothing of consequence, and I am weary of being useless. I squeezed her hand gently. And because, Miss Hartwell, something in me recognized something in you. Two people who have been failed by those who should have protected them. Perhaps we can protect each other. She studied me for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant she made her decision. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and in her eyes, the fear was replaced by something fiercer, hope, fragile as spun glass, but there nonetheless. Very well, Your Grace. Then let us make a pact. You help me reclaim my life, and I—" She hesitated, then smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. "I will help you reclaim yours." "I am not certain mine is worth reclaiming." "Then we shall have to see about that, won't we?" Despite everything, I found myself smiling back. "I suppose we shall." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the morning light was growing stronger. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour, and I thought, perhaps for the first time in 7 years, that there might be something worth waking for, after all. Serafina recovered quickly, more quickly than Dr. Black had anticipated. Within 2 days, she was walking, though she tired easily. Within 3, she insisted on leaving the inn. "We cannot stay here," she said, pacing the small room with the restless energy of a caged bird. "Richard will eventually realize I am not dead. When he does, he will come looking." "Let him come," I said darkly. "I would relish the opportunity to discuss his actions." "And what would you do? Challenge him to a duel? He is my brother, Your Grace. Killing him would accomplish nothing except to put your own neck in a noose." She was right, damn her. I had already considered and discarded a dozen violent fantasies involving Richard Hartwell. English law took a dim view of dukes who murdered barons' sons, regardless of provocation. "Then what do you suggest?" I asked. She stopped pacing and turned to face me, her expression thoughtful. "We need leverage. Something that would force my father to admit his lies and restore my name. Something that would make it more costly for him to maintain the fiction of my disgrace than to confess the truth.
Such as? I do not know yet, but I have an idea where we might start looking. She crossed to the window, gazing out at the muddy courtyard below. Thomas Graves. Before he was beaten and expelled, he told me he had discovered something, an irregularity in my father's accounts. He was planning to bring it to the steward's attention, but then we were discovered in the conservatory. I think... She turned back to me, her eyes bright with calculation. I think my father accused me to discredit Thomas, to ensure that anything Thomas said afterward would be dismissed as the ravings of a disgraced tutor seeking revenge. You think your father is embezzling? I think my father is hiding something, and I think Thomas knew what it was. I stood, my mind already racing through possibilities. Where is Thomas now? I do not know. After he was expelled, I tried to send him letters, but they were all intercepted. The last I heard, he had gone to London seeking employment. London? I smiled grimly. Then to London we shall go. I have a townhouse there, small, unfashionable, but serviceable. You can stay there while we search for Thomas. Your Grace, Julian. If we are to be conspirators, you should call me Julian. She blinked, clearly taken aback by the informality. Then, slowly, tentatively, she smiled. Very well, Julian, but only if you call me Serafina. Serafina, I repeated, and liked the way her name felt in my mouth. Then it is settled. We leave for London at first light. That night, I wrote to my solicitor, instructing him to make inquiries about Thomas Graves, discreetly, carefully, with no mention of why I wished to find him. I also wrote to my banker, asking for a full accounting of the Hartwell family finances for the past 5 years. If Baron Hartwell was hiding something, I would uncover it. And if Richard Hartwell came looking for his sister, he would find not a helpless woman buried in the earth, but a duke with a score to settle. We traveled to London by coach. Thaddeus sprawled across the seat opposite us like some great gray guardian. Serafina spent most of the journey staring out the window, lost in thoughts I could not fathom. Occasionally she would speak. Observations about the landscape, questions about my estate, small confidences that felt like gifts. I used to love autumn, she said at one point, watching the golden trees blur past. The smell of wood smoke, the crunch of leaves underfoot. Now it only reminds me of being buried. Then we shall have to create new memories, I replied, better ones. She glanced at me, and something in her expression made my chest tighten. You are kind, Julian, kinder than I deserve. Everyone deserves kindness, Serafina. It is perhaps the only thing we all deserve equally. The journey took 2 days. We stayed at coaching inns where I registered us as cousins traveling to London for the season. Serafina played the role of invalid recovering from illness with convincing fragility, though I noticed she ate with the appetite of someone making up for lost meals. On the second evening, as we sat before the fire in yet another anonymous inn, she asked me about my father. You said he lost everything gambling. What did he gamble on? I stared into the flames, remembering. Everything. Cards, horses, investments in ventures that any sensible man could see were doomed. He was convinced his luck would turn, that the next wager would restore our fortune. It never did. Do you miss him? I miss who I thought he was. The father who taught me to ride, who read to me from Homer and Virgil. But that man disappeared long before his body gave out. By the end, he was a stranger. Bitter, desperate, raging at the unfairness of a world that owed him nothing. And your mother? She died when I was 12. Fever. My father never truly recovered from losing her. I think, in some way, all his gambling was an attempt to outrun his grief. Serafina reached across the space between us and took my hand, a gesture so natural, so unself-conscious, that it stole my breath. "I am sorry, Julian, for your losses, for your sister, for everything you have endured. And I for yours." We sat like that for a long time, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers, and I realized, with a clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying, that I was falling in love with her. Not the desperate, passionate love of poets, but something deeper, a recognition of kinship, of two damaged souls finding unexpected solace in each other's presence. She was my mirror, my complement, my salvation dressed in borrowed clothes and haunted eyes. I loved her. God help me, I loved her, and I had absolutely no idea what to do about it. London embraced us with its usual indifference, a vast, teeming city that swallowed newcomers whole and spat them out changed. My townhouse was in Bloomsbury, a respectable, if unfashionable neighborhood, favored by scholars and impoverished nobility. The house itself was narrow, 3 stories of brick and timber that leaned slightly to the left, as though weary of standing upright. "It is not Ravenswood Manor," I said apologetically as I helped Serafina down from the coach. "It is perfect," she replied, and I believed she meant it. We settled into an uneasy domesticity. Serafina took the second-floor bedroom, I took the third, and Thaddeus claimed the parlor as his domain. My housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, was a widow of 60 with a face like a dried apple and a complete lack of curiosity about why I had arrived with a young woman who was clearly not my cousin. "None of my business," she said when I attempted an explanation. "You pay me to keep house, not to gossip. The girl looks like she needs feeding. I'll make soup." Mrs. Pemberton's soup, it turned out, was miraculous. Thick with vegetables and barley, flavored with herbs I could not identify, but that tasted of comfort and home. Serafina ate 3 bowls and finally began to look less like a ghost and more like a living woman. "You have found us a fairy godmother," she told me that evening as we sat in the cramped parlor, Thaddeus snoring at our feet. "I have found us a miracle worker," I agreed. "Now to business. My solicitor has located Thomas Graves." Serafina sat up straight, her eyes wide. "Where?" "He is employed as a clerk at a bank in the city. Apparently, he has done quite well for himself. His employer speaks highly of his mathematical abilities. My solicitor also reports that Thomas has been making inquiries of his own." "What sort of inquiries?" "About Baron Hartwell's finances. It seems Thomas has not forgotten what he discovered." Hope bloomed across Serafina's face like sunrise. "Then we must speak with him. Tomorrow. Please, Julian." "Tomorrow," I agreed. "But, Serafina, you must prepare yourself. He may not wish to see you. He may have moved on with his life. He may not love me anymore," she finished quietly. "I know. But I must try. I must at least tell him the truth of what happened. Then we shall tell him together." She looked at me then with such gratitude, such trust, that I felt my heart break and heal simultaneously. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." I wanted to tell her that I would do anything for her, that I would move mountains, challenge gods, burn the world down if it meant she could be happy. But such declarations felt too large, too dangerous for the fragile peace we had built. So, instead, I simply said, "You are welcome," and let the moment pass. But that night, lying in my narrow bed and listening to the city sounds outside my window, I allowed myself to imagine a future where Serafina was not merely a responsibility, not merely a woman I had saved, but mine. It was a dangerous fantasy, and yet I could not make myself stop. The bank where Thomas Graves worked was a respectable establishment in Threadneedle Street, all marble columns and hushed efficiency. We arrived at midday, and I sent my card in to the manager, requesting a private audience with Mr. Graves on a matter of some delicacy. The manager, a fussy man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, was clearly torn between curiosity and discretion. "Mr. Graves is one of our most valued employees," he said carefully. "I would not wish to disturb him on a trivial matter." "I assure you the matter is far from trivial. It concerns his former employer, Baron Hartwell, and certain financial irregularities." The word irregularities had the desired effect. Within minutes, we were ushered into a private office where Thomas Graves stood waiting. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that widened in shock when he saw Serafina. "My God," he breathed, "Serafina?" She stepped forward, and I saw her hands trembling. "Hello, Thomas." For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Then Thomas crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her with a fierce desperation that made me feel like an intruder in my own investigation. "They told me you were dead," he said hoarsely, his face pressed against her hair. "Your father sent word that you had died of fever. I did not believe it, could not believe it, but I had no way to confirm. Oh God, Serafina, I thought I had lost you." "You nearly did," she said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Thomas, there is so much I need to tell you." They broke apart finally, and Thomas seemed to remember my presence. He turned to me with an expression that was half gratitude, half suspicion. "And you are?" "Julian Ashworth, Duke of Ravenswood. I am the one who found Miss Hartwell. Or rather, my hound found her." "Found her where?" "In a coffin, buried beside the London road by her own brother." The color drained from Thomas's face. "What?" So we told him. Everything. Serafina's voice remained steady as she recounted her father's accusations, her mother's betrayal, Richard's unspeakable crime. Thomas listened with an expression of growing horror, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "I will kill him," he said when she finished. "I will find Richard Hartwell and I will kill him with my bare hands." "No," Serafina said firmly. "That is not justice, Thomas. That is merely revenge. What we need is the truth about what my father was hiding, about why he was so desperate to discredit you." Thomas drew a shaky breath, clearly fighting for control. "I can help with that. After your father expelled me, I could not let it go. I knew what I had seen in those ledgers, discrepancies that did not make sense, money moving in ways it should not. So I have been investigating, carefully, slowly, and I have found something." He moved to his desk and withdrew a leather portfolio, which he opened to reveal pages of meticulous notes and figures. "Your father," Thomas said to Serafina, "has been embezzling from the estate for years. Not for himself, at least not primarily. He has been paying off debts, gambling debts specifically, owed to a man named Silas Blackwood." I felt ice water flood my veins. "Blackwood? As in—" "Sir Edmund Blackthorne's cousin, yes. The very man your father tried to force Serafina to marry." Thomas's smile was bitter. "It is quite elegant, really. Your father owed Blackwood a fortune. Blackwood agreed to forgive the debts in exchange for Serafina's hand in marriage to his cousin. When Serafina refused, your father manufactured a scandal to discredit her and ensure she would have no choice." "But why bury me?" Serafina asked. "Why not simply send me away?" "Because," Thomas said gently, "you were too beloved by the servants, too well known in the village.
As long as you lived, there was a chance someone might listen to your side of the story. As long as you lived, you were a threat to the fiction your father had created. The room fell silent as we absorbed this. Then I spoke, my voice cold with fury. We will expose him. We will take this evidence to the authorities and ensure that Baron Hartwell faces justice. It is not enough, Thomas said. The documents I have could be dismissed as the work of a disgruntled former employee. We need something more, something undeniable. Such as? Thomas looked at Serafina, and I saw an idea forming behind his eyes. We need Baron Hartwell to confess, and I think I know how to make that happen. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and absolutely insane, which is perhaps why I agreed to it. We would host a gathering, a small soirée at my townhouse, ostensibly to celebrate my return to London society. Among the invited guests would be Baron Hartwell, Sir Edmund Blackthorne, Silas Blackwood, and several prominent members of society whose good opinion the Baron valued. And at this gathering, we would confront him, publicly, with evidence of his crimes and a choice: confess and face ruin, or maintain his lies and watch as we destroy his reputation piece by piece. He will never come, I said. Why would he attend a party hosted by an impoverished duke he has never met? Because, Thomas said, with a smile that did not reach his eyes, we will make sure he knows that Serafina will be there, alive, and prepared to tell her story to anyone who will listen. You want to use me as bait, Serafina said flatly. I want to give your father a chance to do the right thing, Thomas corrected. To admit his mistakes and make amends. It is more mercy than he deserves, but it is what separates us from him. Serafina looked at me, seeking my opinion. I thought of all the ways this plan could fail, all the potential disasters waiting to unfold. But I also thought of her emerging from that coffin, fighting for every breath, refusing to surrender even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. If you wish to do this, I said slowly, I will stand beside you, whatever happens. She smiled, a real smile, bright and fierce. Then let us invite my father to dinner, and let us show him what it means to bury the wrong daughter. The invitations went out the following day, carefully worded to suggest scandal without explicitly stating its nature. We intimated that a matter of some delicacy regarding the Hartwell family would be discussed, and that all interested parties should attend if they wished to hear the truth. Baron Hartwell responded within hours. He would be delighted to attend. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Serafina worked with Thomas to organize the evidence, creating a presentation that would be impossible to refute. I worked with Mrs. Pemberton to prepare the house, transforming my shabby townhouse into something approaching respectability. And in the quiet moments between our planning, Serafina and I grew closer. We would sit together in the parlor after Thomas had left for the evening, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her childhood in Somerset, about her mother's rose garden and her brother before he became a stranger. I told her about Ravenswood Manor before the creditors came, about summer spent riding through the estate's forests with my sister. One evening, as we sat before the fire, she asked me the question I had been dreading. What happens after, Julian? After we expose my father, after justice is served, what then? I did not pretend to misunderstand. What do you want to happen? She was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the flames. I do not know. A month ago, I thought I would marry Thomas, that we would build a life together despite my father's objections. But now, she glanced at me,
and I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Now I am not certain what I want, or whom. My heart was a wild thing in my chest. And if you had a choice, if you could have anything, I would choose freedom, she said finally. Freedom to make my own decisions. Freedom to love whom I choose without shame or fear. Is that naive? No, I said hoarsely. That is not naive. That is merely human. She reached out and took my hand, and we sat like that until the fire burned low, and Mrs. Pemberton appeared to scold us about wasting candles. But I remembered the warmth of her fingers, and I wondered if, perhaps, I might be allowed to hope. The night of the gathering arrived with the weight of destiny. Serafina, dressed in a gown I had purchased from a modiste in Covent Garden, midnight blue silk that made her eyes look like storm clouds shot through with lightning. Thomas arrived early, nervous and pale, but resolute. And I was terrified. Not of Baron Hartwell, not of the confrontation to come, but of the possibility that when this was over, Serafina would choose Thomas, would ride off into whatever future she had once imagined, and I would be left alone in my leaning townhouse with nothing but memories of what might have been. But there was no time for such thoughts. The guests were arriving. Baron Hartwell came with Richard, both dressed in formal evening wear that spoke of wealth and power. The Baron was a large man, florid and loud, with the kind of hardiness that concealed cruelty. Richard was his father's son in every sense, handsome in a conventional way, but with eyes that held no warmth. Neither of them expected to see Serafina standing in my parlor, alive and radiant with barely contained fury. "Hello, father," she said, and her voice could have cut glass. "Hello, Richard. Surprised to see me?" The Baron went white. Richard actually stumbled backward as though confronted with a ghost. "Serafina," the Baron croaked, "but you are dead?" "Yes, that was rather the point, was it not?" She stepped forward, and I saw several other guests edge closer, sensing drama. "Or did you forget about burying your daughter alive because she refused to marry the man you owed money to?" The room erupted. Gasps, exclamations, the rustle of fabric as people turned to stare. Baron Hartwell tried to speak, but Serafina cut him off. "Do not bother denying it. We have evidence. Bank records showing your debts to Silas Blackwood. Ledgers documenting your embezzlement from the estate. Testimony from servants who heard you plotting with Sir Edmund Blackthorne. And we have me, alive, despite your best efforts." She gestured to Thomas, who stepped forward with the portfolio of documents. "You can confess now," Serafina continued. "Admit your crimes and perhaps salvage some shred of dignity. Or you can continue lying, and we will take this evidence to the magistrate and watch as you are stripped of your title, your lands, and your freedom. The choice is yours." The Baron looked around the room, at the witnesses, at the damning documents, at his daughter whom he had tried to erase. And I saw the exact moment he broke. His voice faltered. "I did what I had to do. The debts, Blackwood would have ruined me. I had no choice." "You had every choice," Serafina said coldly. "You could have sold the estate. You could have economized. You could have done 1,000 things that did not involve sacrificing your daughter. But you chose the easy path, the coward's path. I am your father. You were my father. The man who buried me is nothing to me now." Baron Hartwell lunged forward, but Richard caught his arm. "Father, do not. It is done. We are done." And in that moment, I saw something unexpected in Richard's face. Not remorse, precisely, but a kind of weary resignation. He looked at Serafina with eyes that held a shadow of the brother she had once known. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "for what I did to you. I was wrong. Father was wrong. We were all wrong." It was not enough, could never be enough, but it was something. Serafina held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than forgiveness. "Thank you," she said. "It changes nothing, but thank you." The Baron was removed from the house shortly thereafter, escorted by constables I had arranged to have waiting nearby. The other guests dispersed in a flurry of shocked whispers that would, I knew, become the scandal of the season. And when they were gone, when it was just Serafina, Thomas, and myself standing in the now empty parlor, Serafina began to laugh. It started as a small sound, barely a chuckle, but it grew and grew until she was laughing so hard she had to sit down, tears streaming down her face. "We did it!" she gasped between peals of laughter. "We actually did it! Oh, God, did you see his face?" Thomas started laughing too, and then I joined in, and suddenly we were all three of us laughing like lunatics, drunk on victory and relief and the sheer improbability of our success. When the laughter finally subsided, Serafina looked up at me with eyes still bright with tears. "Thank you," she said, "both of you. I could not have done this without you." "What will you do now?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. She glanced at Thomas, then back at me. "I honestly do not know. For the first time in my life, I am free to choose. It is rather terrifying." "Freedom usually is," Thomas said gently. "But Serafina, whatever you decide, whatever you choose to do, I want you to know that I love you. I have always loved you. And if you wish to marry me, to build that life we once dreamed of, I would be honored. But if you do not," he swallowed hard, "then I will accept that, and I will still be glad that you are alive and safe." It was a beautiful speech, a noble speech, and I hated him for it, even as I respected him for saying what I had been too cowardly to voice. Serafina was quiet for a long time. Then she stood and crossed to Thomas, taking his hands in hers. "Thomas," she said softly, "you are the best man I have ever known. You are brilliant and kind and honorable. Any woman would be fortunate to be loved by you." "But?" he asked, and I heard the resignation in his voice. "But I am not the same girl who fell in love with you in that conservatory. That girl died in a coffin on the London road. The woman who emerged is someone different, someone I am still learning to know. And I think," she drew a shaky breath, "I think she needs time. Time to heal. Time to discover who she is when she is not defined by her father's expectations or her family's shame or anyone else's dreams for her future." Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I understand. Do you hate me?" "Never," he said fiercely. "I could never hate you, Serafina. I am only grateful that you are alive." They embraced, and I looked away, giving them what privacy I could in the cramped parlor. When they parted, Thomas left quietly, and Serafina and I were alone. She turned to me, and I saw in her face the same uncertainty I felt in my own heart. "Julian," she began. "You need not explain," I interrupted quickly. "I understand. You need time, and I—" "Julian," she said again, more firmly, "please let me finish." I fell silent. "What I told Thomas was true," she continued. "I need time to heal, to discover who I am outside the shadow of my family. But I also need you to know that when I imagine my future, That uncertain, terrifying, wonderful future. You are in it, not as my savior, not as my protector, but as my partner, my friend, and perhaps, one day, something more. My heart stopped. Serafina. She stepped closer, so close I could see the flecks of silver in her gray eyes. I am not asking for promises, Julian. I am not asking for declarations of love or proposals of marriage. I am only asking if you would be willing to wait, to let me find my footing. And then, when I am ready, she smiled tentatively. Then we might see what we could become together. I wanted to tell her I would wait forever, that I would move heaven and earth for even the possibility of a future with her. But instead, I simply took her hands in mine and said the only thing that mattered. I will wait. Her smile blazed like the sun. Then let us begin, she said. You and I, starting now. And there, in my shabby parlor, with Thaddeus snoring at our feet and the echoes of laughter still hanging in the air, we made our first small plan. Not for justice or revenge, but for something far more radical. A life built together, one day at a time. 6 months later, I stood in the gardens of what had once been Ravenswood Manor. The estate had been sold, as I had known it must be, but the new owner was a manufacturing magnate with a fondness for history and a willingness to allow the former duke occasional visits. Serafina stood beside me, her hand tucked into the crook of my arm. She wore a simple day dress of cream muslin, and her hair, grown longer now, was caught up in a ribbon that matched her eyes. "This is beautiful," she said, gazing at the rose garden my mother had planted decades ago. "She did," I said quietly. "She was married from this garden, in fact. It was the last time I remember seeing her truly happy." Serafina squeezed my arm gently. "Tell me about her. I want to know her, even if I never had the chance to meet her." So I did. I told her about Catherine, my brilliant, beautiful, doomed sister who had loved poetry and horses and who had married a monster because she believed in happy endings. I told her about the guilt I carried, the weight of having failed her when she needed me most. And when I finished, Serafina did not offer platitudes or false comfort. She simply said, "I wish I could have known her. She sounds like someone who would have understood me." "She would have loved you," I said, and knew it was true. We walked in silence for a while, following the garden paths that wound through roses and lavender and sage. Thaddeus trotted ahead of us, his tail waving like a gray banner. Finally, Serafina stopped beneath an ancient oak tree and turned to face me. "Julian," she said, "I have something to tell you." My heart stuttered. "What is it?" "Thomas has asked me to invest in a new venture he is starting, a school for children whose families cannot afford proper education. He wants to offer scholarships, hire the best tutors, create opportunities for those who have none." She paused. "He has asked if I would serve on the board of directors." "That is wonderful," I said, meaning it. "Will you accept?" "I already have. But there is more." She took both my hands in hers, her expression serious. "I have also been corresponding with a women's reform society in London. They have invited me to speak about my experiences, about being buried alive, about how the law treats women as property, about how desperately we need change. Will you do it?" "I want to, but it will be controversial, Julian. I will be inserting myself into political debates, challenging powerful men, making myself a target. If you and I," she hesitated, "if we are to build a future together, you need to know that I will not be a quiet wife who sits in drawing rooms embroidering cushions. I will be loud. I will be difficult. I will be inconvenient." I started to laugh, not mockingly, but with pure, unrestrained joy. "Serafina,"
I said, when I could speak again. I would not want you any other way. Be loud, be difficult, shake the foundations of society if you must. I will be standing beside you, holding your coat while you fight. Her smile was incandescent. You are certain? Because once we begin this path, there is no going back. You will be the Duke married to the radical suffragist. Your peers will mock you. You may lose what little social standing you have left. Then they can mock me. I have spent 7 years caring what society thinks of me, and it has brought me nothing but loneliness and debt. I would rather spend the next 7 years, the next 70 years, scandalizing the ton with you than wasting away in respectable solitude. She laughed, and the sound was like bells chiming. 70 years? You are optimistic. I am hopeful, I corrected. There is a difference. Yes, she said softly. I suppose there is. She stepped closer, and I felt my breath catch. We had been careful these past months, maintaining propriety, allowing her the space she had asked for. We had shared meals and conversations, walks and laughter, but nothing more. Nothing that might be construed as courtship. But now, standing in my mother's garden with sunlight filtering through the oak leaves above us, Serafina looked at me with an expression that made my heart race. Julian, she said, I am ready. If your offer still stands, if you are still willing to wait, to build this strange, improbable future with me, then I am ready to begin. Begin what? I asked, though I thought I knew. Everything, she whispered. Begin everything. And then she kissed me. It was not a passionate kiss, not the desperate, hungry embrace of lovers too long denied. It was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Her lips were soft against mine, and she tasted of hope and possibility and all the tomorrows we might create together. When we parted, I rested my forehead against hers and breathed, I love you. I know, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I have known for months. I was only waiting for the right moment to tell you that I love you too. And is this the right moment? No, she admitted. The right moment was probably weeks ago, but this moment will do. I laughed and kissed her again, and Thaddeus barked approvingly from somewhere in the rose bushes. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans for a future that was uncertain but undeniably ours. Serafina would give her speeches. I would support her work. Together, we would find a way to matter, not because of titles or wealth, but because we chose to use whatever influence we had for something good. It would not be easy. There would be obstacles, setbacks, moments of doubt and frustration. But we would face them together. And if I had learned anything from finding Serafina in that coffin, from watching her rise from death to reclaim her life with such fierce determination, it was this. Some people are buried and stay buried. Some people are buried and claw their way back to the surface, forever marked by the earth they escaped. And some people, the rare, precious few, are buried and emerge not broken, but forged, transformed by their descent into darkness, made into something stronger, braver, more luminous than they were before. Serafina was one of those people, and I was grateful beyond measure that I had been given the chance to witness her transformation, to support it, to love her through it and beyond it. What are you thinking? She asked, studying my face. That I am the luckiest man in England. Only England, not the world. I am trying to be realistic. She laughed and pulled me down for another kiss. And as the afternoon sun painted the garden gold and Thaddeus dozed beneath the roses, I thought that perhaps, just perhaps, Happy endings were not the province of fairy tales after all. Sometimes they came in the form of a woman buried alive, a hound who would not be dissuaded, and a duke who had finally found something worth fighting for. Sometimes they came wrapped in dirt and desperation and triumph against impossible odds. And sometimes, most miraculous of all, they were just the beginning. Epilogue. 1 year later. The school opened on a Tuesday in September, in a converted warehouse in Clerkenwell. It was not grand. The windows were drafty, the floors creaked, and the desks were mismatched pieces donated by various sympathetic aristocrats who wished to support Thomas's venture without actually committing significant funds. But it was glorious nonetheless. 50 children sat in that first class, boys and girls from families that could never have afforded proper education. Thomas stood at the front of the room, his face alight with a joy I had never seen in him before, teaching mathematics to students who drank in every word as though it were water in a desert. Serafina and I sat at the back, watching. Her hand was in mine, her wedding band, simple gold, purchased with the last of my savings, catching the light. We had married quietly 3 months ago, in a ceremony attended only by Thomas, Mrs. Pemberton, and Thaddeus, who had knocked over the flowers and stolen a piece of wedding cake. It had been perfect. "He has found his purpose," Serafina whispered to me, nodding toward Thomas. I replied, thinking of the speech she had given the previous week to a hall full of reformers and radicals. She had spoken about justice, about the rights of women, about the need for laws that protected rather than oppressed. The newspapers had called her everything from inspiring to dangerous. She had been delighted by both. "And you?" she asked, turning those storm-gray eyes on me. "Have you found yours?" I looked at her, my wife, my partner, my unexpected salvation, and smiled. "Yes," I said simply, "I have found mine in supporting yours." She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "That is a terrible answer, but honest. I suppose I can forgive you for honesty." "How generous." We watched as Thomas dismissed the class and the children erupted in excited chatter, gathering their few belongings and filing out into the autumn afternoon. Several of them stopped to thank him, their faces bright with the kind of hope that comes from being seen, being valued, being given a chance. As we left the school, walking hand in hand through streets that smelled of smoke and possibility, Serafina said, "Do you ever regret it, giving up what little remained of your estate to help fund this? We could have used that money to restore Ravenswood." "I regret nothing," I said firmly. "Ravenswood was my father's dream, not mine. This," I gestured to the school behind us, to the children streaming past us with their futures suddenly bright. "This is something real, something that matters." "I love you," she said suddenly, fiercely. "I love you too." We walked in companionable silence for a while, Thaddeus trotting ahead of us as he always did, his nose to the ground in search of interesting smells. And then Serafina stopped so abruptly I nearly stumbled. "What is it?" I asked. She pointed to a narrow alley between 2 buildings, where a woman sat huddled against the wall, a baby wrapped in rags in her arms. There was a look of desperation in the woman's eyes that I recognized, that haunted, hunted expression of someone who had been failed by everyone who should have protected them. Serafina looked at me, and I saw in her face the same determination that had driven her to survive her own burial. "We cannot save everyone," I said gently. "No," she agreed, "but we can save her, today. Right now, we can give her 1 day of safety, 1 meal, 1 moment of kindness. And then tomorrow, we will find someone else to save." I smiled, because of course she was right. Of course this was who we were now. 2 people who had been buried and had clawed their way back to the surface, determined to pull others up with them. Very well, I said. Let us go help her. So we did. And the next day, we helped someone else. And the day after that, and the day after that, until it became not a mission, but simply our life, the daily work of extending grace to those who needed it most. It was exhausting. It was frustrating. It was never quite enough. But it was ours, our choice, our purpose, our redemption. And somewhere, I like to think, my sister was watching and smiling, proud that I had finally learned what she tried to teach me, that the only way to survive being buried is to make sure no one else has to be buried alone. That love, real love, is not about grand gestures or tragic sacrifices. It is about showing up every day for the people who need you. It is about being the sign that says, help her, help him, help them, and then doing the digging.